cancel the merger. The word struck the grand ballroom harder than a gunshot. Crystal chandeliers shimmered overhead, while nearly 300 of New York's wealthiest investors, politicians, and old money families froze in stunned silence. One billionaire lurched to his feet. "Adrian, that's a $4 billion agreement." No response. Adrian DeLuca remained perfectly still, his dark eyes fixed on a woman standing near the ballroom exit. Emma Brooks. She held an inexpensive leather handbag against her chest, the same bag she had quietly packed only an hour earlier because she had already decided to disappear from his life forever. Beside Adrian, his uncle leaned closer. "You're throwing away the empire." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "Please, don't do this because of me." Only then did Adrian finally speak. "I'm not risking my empire for her." The room seemed to breathe again. Then he finished. "I'm risking it because she's the only person who never wanted it." Silence swallowed every whispered judgment. No one in that room could understand how the woman everyone had dismissed as the fat girl no one wanted had become the only person powerful enough to change the destiny of the most feared man in New York. 5 days earlier. 5 days earlier, Emma Brooks had been worrying about coffee stains instead of billion-dollar negotiations. The elevator doors opened onto the 32nd floor of Brooks Strategic Consulting, where glass walls reflected the pale Manhattan sunrise. She slipped quietly past co-workers already gathered around the espresso machine. No one greeted her. Not because they disliked her, because they rarely noticed she had arrived. Emma had grown accustomed to invisibility. At 32, she knew exactly how the world measured women before they ever opened their mouths. Too heavy. Too plain. Too ordinary. People always believed those 3 words told them everything worth knowing. They never stayed long enough to discover how her mind worked. Emma didn't waste energy trying to impress anyone anymore. She simply solved problems, impossible ones. By 9 o'clock, her manager rushed into the conference room, carrying a stack of financial reports. "We've got another emergency." Emma looked up. What happened? A non-profit foundation is about to finalize a massive international investment. So something feels wrong. He dropped the documents onto the table. They've already hired 2 consulting firms. And? They both approved it. Emma smiled politely. "Then why call me?" "Because you're the only person I know who finds problems everyone else misses." She accepted the file without another question. Compliments still made her uncomfortable. Most of her career had been built on fixing disasters while someone else accepted public credit. She had learned long ago that recognition was temporary. Competence was permanent. The client file belonged to the DeLuca Foundation. Emma had never heard of it before. The foundation financed hospitals, scholarships, and urban redevelopment projects throughout New York. Its charitable reputation appeared flawless. She spent the next 4 hours reading contracts, page after page, clause after clause. Everything looked perfect, which immediately bothered her. Nothing involving billions of dollars was ever perfect. She leaned back in her chair, closed her eyes, then began reading everything again. Slowly, very slowly. Halfway through a supplemental agreement, she stopped. 1 sentence. 23 words hidden inside 70 pages. Most readers would skim past it. Emma didn't. A contingency clause transferred legal responsibility for environmental liabilities to the foundation under specific restructuring conditions. If activated, the charitable organization would inherit hundreds of millions in hidden obligations. The investment itself wasn't the scam. The paperwork surrounding it was. Someone had buried a financial landmine where only an obsessive reader would ever find it. Emma highlighted the clause, verified every cross-reference, checked every amendment 3 more times, then quietly sent her report. No dramatic presentation, no demand for recognition. Only 1 sentence accompanied the document. You may want legal counsel to review Section 18 before signing tomorrow. Then she returned to work on another client. As far as Emma was concerned, her day was over. She never imagined that one email had just saved one of New York's most powerful families from catastrophe. Across Manhattan, the executive boardroom inside DeLuca Holdings had never been quieter. 8 attorneys, 3 financial advisors, 2 investment bankers. All stared at the highlighted paragraph projected across the massive screen. No one spoke for nearly a minute. Finally, Adrian DeLuca broke the silence. Who found this? The lead attorney cleared his throat. A consultant. What firm? Brooks Strategic. And why didn't any of you catch it? No answer came. Adrian wasn't angry. His calm voice was always more dangerous than shouting. One attorney finally admitted, because none of us expected someone to read every supplemental amendment. Adrian continued studying the highlighted clause. It wasn't simply correct. It was elegant. Whoever discovered it hadn't been searching for fraud. They had been searching for truth. There was a difference. He closed the file. Invite her. The executives exchanged confused glances. For what purpose? I'd like to thank her. We can send flowers. No. A bonus? No. Then what? Adrian stood and looked out over Manhattan. I want to meet the person who walked away after saving hundreds of millions of dollars. His chief advisor hesitated. Most consultants would already be negotiating a promotion. A faint smile crossed Adrian's face. Exactly. And she didn't. For the first time in years, the most disciplined man in New York found himself curious about someone he had never met. He had built an empire by understanding ambition. Now he wanted to understand the woman who seemed completely untouched by it. He had no idea that the meeting he had just requested would eventually force him to choose between everything he had ever built and the only woman who never asked for any of it. The invitation arrived the following morning. Emma almost deleted it. The sender's name meant nothing to her. DeLuca Holdings, Executive Office. She assumed it was a mistake. Only after opening the email did she realize the chairman himself was requesting a private meeting to discuss her recent report. She stared at the screen for nearly a minute. Her manager appeared beside her desk, with a grin she rarely saw. You actually did it. I did what? You impressed Adrian DeLuca. Emma frowned. Who? Her manager blinked. You seriously don't know who he is? She shook her head. I read contracts, not society magazines. He laughed once, before realizing she wasn't joking. Emma, people spend years trying to get 5 minutes with him. She simply replied, I only pointed out one clause. Her manager smiled. And that's exactly why he wants to meet you. DeLuca Holdings occupied the top floors of one of Manhattan's most recognizable towers. Everything about the building communicated quiet authority. No oversized logos, no unnecessary luxury, just polished stone, warm lighting, and people who moved with disciplined purpose. Emma suddenly became aware of her own reflection in the revolving glass doors. She wore the same navy blue business suit she had owned for 4 years. Comfortable shoes, simple earrings, no designer handbag, no expensive watch. She almost turned around. Not because she was afraid of Adrian DeLuca, because she suddenly remembered every occasion when she had walked into elegant rooms and immediately felt like she had entered someone else's life. The receptionist smiled warmly. Ms. Brooks? Yes. Mr. DeLuca is expecting you. No curious stare. No polite surprise at her appearance. Just professionalism. It eased her nerves more than she expected. The executive office overlooked nearly the entire Manhattan skyline. Adrian stood beside the window, reading a report. Without looking up, he said, "Thank you for coming." His voice was calm, measured, almost quiet. Emma had imagined someone louder, more intimidating. Instead, the man before her radiated something far more unsettling. Complete control. He closed the folder and finally faced her. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Emma waited for the familiar sequence. The quick glance, the subtle evaluation, the almost invisible disappointment people often tried to hide when meeting her for the first time. It never came. Adrian looked directly into her eyes. Not above them, not around them, not through them, at her, as though appearance had never entered the equation. It was such an unfamiliar experience that Emma almost forgot why she was there. "You found something 12 experienced attorneys overlooked," Adrian said. "I only had more time." "No," he slid the contract across the table. "You had a different way of seeing." Emma shrugged gently. "I just assume every perfect agreement is hiding an imperfect sentence." For the first time that morning, Adrian smiled. Small, almost invisible, but effective. A silver envelope rested on the conference table. Adrian pushed it toward her. A consulting fee. Emma opened it. Inside was a number larger than her annual salary. She looked back at him. "This is incorrect." "It isn't. I spent one afternoon reviewing documents. You prevented losses exceeding $600 million. I was already paid by my employer." "This is separate." Emma slowly closed the envelope. "I can't accept it." One of Adrian's advisors, seated quietly in the corner, finally spoke. "Most consultants negotiate for more." Emma looked genuinely confused. "Why?" The room fell silent. "Because that's how business works," the advisor answered. Emma smiled kindly. "My job was to tell the truth." She placed the envelope back onto the table. "If truth becomes more expensive depending on who hears it, eventually people stop telling it." No one responded. Adrian simply watched her. Years of negotiations had taught him to recognize rehearsed humility. This wasn't performance. She genuinely believed what she had just said. That made her extraordinarily rare. As Emma prepared to leave, Adrian stopped her. "I have another proposal." She turned. "Our investment division is entering several complicated negotiations over the next few weeks. I'm not an investment banker. I know. I'm not a lawyer. I know. I'm certainly not qualified to advise one of New York's largest corporations." Adrian shook his head. "I don't need another expert." He paused. "I need someone willing to question experts." Emma laughed softly. "I imagine your executives won't enjoy that." "They don't have to." She hesitated. The offer sounded impossible. Temporary. Interesting. Dangerous. What exactly would I be doing? Sitting in meetings? Only sitting? And telling me what everyone else failed to notice? She considered the proposal. "I'd need approval from my firm." "I've already spoken with them." She looked surprised. "You assumed I'd say yes." "No. I assumed they'd be smart enough to let you decide." For reasons she couldn't explain. Emma accepted. 3 nights later, she attended her first DeLuca family dinner. The estate looked less like a private residence and more like a European palace hidden inside Manhattan. Luxury surrounded everything. Valets, classical music, historic paintings, crystal chandeliers. Emma quietly reminded herself that she was there to solve business problems, nothing else. A butler escorted her into the dining room. Conversation stopped. Not dramatically, almost politely. Just long enough for everyone to notice the unfamiliar woman entering beside Adrian DeLuca. His uncle observed her from head to toe. One cousin raised an eyebrow. Another guest whispered something that produced restrained laughter. Emma had seen that look countless times before. The look people wore when they believed someone had wandered into the wrong room. Then another woman entered. Victoria Romano. Elegant, graceful, impeccably dressed. She crossed the room with effortless confidence, before lightly kissing Adrian's cheek. "So, this is your famous consultant." Her smile never reached her eyes. Emma offered a courteous handshake. "Emma Brooks." Victoria ignored the hand completely. Instead, she tilted her head ever so slightly. "I expected someone different." Emma smiled. "I'm sure you did." The answer was so calm that several guests looked up from their wine glasses. Victoria recovered instantly. "I'm delighted you're joining us." Emma thanked her sincerely. She didn't notice the trap. Adrian did. So did his uncle. Victoria had expected embarrassment. Instead, Emma had answered without a trace of insecurity. It was the first move in a social game that had only just begun. Across the table, Adrian watched the exchange in thoughtful silence. Everyone else had looked at Emma and seen an outsider. He looked at her and saw something entirely different. Someone who never fought to appear important, because she had already learned the quiet strength of simply being genuine. And without realizing it, that quiet strength had just become the most interesting person in the room. Dinner began with impeccable manners. Crystal glasses reflected candlelight across the long mahogany table, while conversations drifted effortlessly between politics, philanthropy, and billion-dollar acquisitions. Emma listened more than she spoke. It was easier that way. People revealed far more about themselves when they believed no one important was paying attention. Across from her, Victoria Romano smiled with practiced elegance. "So, Emma." Every conversation around the table softened. People instinctively sensed when someone like Victoria was about to take control. "I hear you specialize in crisis management." Emma nodded. "I do." "How fascinating." Victoria lifted her wine glass. "I've always wondered what draws someone into a career built around cleaning up other people's disasters," Emma answered without hesitation. "I suppose the same thing that draws some people toward creating beautiful things." Victoria blinked. Emma continued with a gentle smile. "Both require believing situations can become better than they are." A few guests exchanged quiet glances. That wasn't the defensive answer they had expected. The appetizers arrived. Conversation resumed, or at least it appeared to. Emma noticed whispers moving from one end of the table to the other. A glance, a smile. Someone checking her dress, someone else pretending not to. She had lived through enough dinners to recognize silent judgment. Years ago, it would have ruined her evening. Now, it simply made her tired. When dessert menus appeared, Victoria struck again. "I hope our chef prepared something suitable." Emma looked up. "What do you mean?" Victoria laughed softly. "Oh, nothing offensive." She lowered her voice, just enough for nearby guests to hear. "I only assumed someone with such an enthusiastic appreciation for food might have particular preferences." The joke floated through the room. Several people looked down. Others smiled awkwardly. No one challenged it. Emma felt the familiar sting, not because the comment was original, because it wasn't. She had heard variations of it since middle school. For one brief second, the old instinct returned. Apologize. Disappear. Pretend it didn't hurt. Instead, she folded her napkin calmly. "My grandmother used to say something interesting." Victoria tilted her head. "Did she?" "She said people who spend dinner studying another person's plate usually miss what's on their own." Silence. A man at the far end of the table accidentally laughed, then immediately coughed into his napkin. Even Adrian's uncle struggled to hide a smile. Victoria's expression remained perfectly composed, but something had changed. The room had expected Emma to become embarrassed. Instead, she had protected her dignity without attacking anyone else's. Adrian noticed every second. After dinner, guests gathered inside the estate's library while coffee was served. Adrian joined Emma near the bookshelves. You handled yourself well. She shrugged. I've had practice. I imagine you have. Emma smiled faintly. People usually think comments like that are about weight. They aren't? They're about permission. Adrian frowned slightly. Permission? They're waiting to see whether I'll agree with them. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. If I laugh along, they feel comfortable. If I become angry, they feel justified. So what do? I disappoint everyone. He looked amused. How? I refuse to hate myself on their behalf. For several seconds, Adrian said nothing. He had negotiated with presidents, corporate raiders, union leaders, foreign ministers. Yet this quiet woman had just explained emotional strength more clearly than anyone he had ever met. The following morning brought the first official negotiation. Representatives from 3 investment firms gathered around the conference table. Emma sat near the end, exactly where she preferred, invisible. Listening. The discussion focused on acquiring a struggling technology company with valuable logistics software. Every projection looked promising. Revenue, growth, expansion. Everyone agreed. Everyone except Emma. She slowly turned another page. Then another. Adrian noticed. You've found something. 20 executives looked toward her. Emma hesitated. I could be wrong. Tell us anyway. She inhaled carefully. The acquisition itself isn't the problem. One investor smiled politely. Then what is? The assumptions. Confused looks spread across the room. Emma pointed toward the financial model. Every forecast assumes fuel costs remain stable for 5 years. Yes. What if they don't? Another executive answered confidently. They always normalize. Emma shook her head. History doesn't support that. She reached for a marker and quietly began writing numbers across the glass board. If transportation expenses increase by only 12%, she adjusted one variable. The company's projected profit disappears. Another adjustment. And by year 3, she finished the calculation. You're funding expansion with debt instead of earnings. The room fell silent. The chief financial officer checked her math, then checked it again. Finally, he looked toward Adrian. She's right. Another executive opened his laptop. Within minutes, every analyst had reached the same conclusion. The deal wasn't impossible. It simply required entirely different terms. The acquisition that had seemed flawless only minutes earlier had nearly become another catastrophic mistake. One investor leaned back in disbelief. How did everyone miss that? Emma answered honestly. You were trying to prove the investment would work. She smiled gently. I was trying to discover how it could fail. No one spoke. For the second time in less than a week, for Dishi, she had saved hundreds of millions of dollars, without raising her voice, without demanding attention, simply by asking the question no one else wanted to ask. As the meeting ended, Adrian's uncle intercepted him outside the conference room. You trust her too quickly. I trust results. She's still an outsider. Adrian buttoned his jacket. So were you once. Family matters. So does judgment. His uncle lowered his voice. You know what people are saying. I know. They think you're becoming distracted. Adrian looked through the glass wall. Emma was helping an assistant gather scattered documents after everyone else had already left. No cameras, no audience, no advantage to herself. Just kindness, offered without expectation. He watched her thank the young assistant, as though she was speaking to the chairwoman of the company. No performance, no calculation, only respect. His uncle followed his gaze. I don't understand what you see. I don't understand what you see. Adrian answered quietly. That's because you're looking where everyone else looks. And where are you looking? The only place that matters. His uncle frowned. Character. For the first time in many years, Adrian realized he had begun anticipating every meeting that included Emma Brooks, not because she solved impossible problems, but because, in rooms full of people competing to appear extraordinary, she never stopped being herself. And somewhere across the city, Victoria Romano was already preparing a far more dangerous trap. One that wouldn't challenge Emma's intelligence. It would challenge whether New York's elite would ever allow a woman like her to truly belong. 3 days before the merger vote, the DeLuca Foundation hosted its annual Legacy Gala. For New York's elite, it wasn't simply another charity event. It was where alliances were quietly formed, where fortunes changed hands behind polite conversations, where reputations were built or destroyed in a single evening. Emma almost declined the invitation. "I'm a consultant," she told Adrian that afternoon. "I don't belong at a gala. You belong wherever your work takes you." She smiled uneasily. Those aren't always the same place. Adrian held her gaze. They should be. By 7 o'clock, the ballroom glittered beneath thousands of crystal lights. Women arrived in couture gowns worth more than luxury cars. Men exchanged billion-dollar handshakes while discussing markets as casually as tomorrow's weather. Emma stepped from the elevator, wearing a deep emerald evening dress. It wasn't designer. She had rented it after reluctantly allowing one of DeLuca Holdings' assistants to convince her she needed formal attire. The dress fit beautifully. For the first time in years, Emma looked into a mirror without immediately searching for flaws. Maybe, just maybe, she looked elegant. That fragile confidence lasted less than 30 seconds. As she entered the ballroom, conversations slowed. Several women smiled politely. A few men glanced away too quickly. Emma knew the pattern. People weren't staring because she looked terrible. They were staring because she didn't fit the picture they expected beside Adrian DeLuca's organization. She inhaled quietly, then walked forward anyway. Across the room, Victoria Romano noticed her immediately. For an instant, surprise crossed her face. Emma looked far more graceful than expected. Beautiful, even. Victoria recovered before anyone else noticed. Beauty could always be challenged. Confidence could always be broken. She simply needed patience. Turning toward the event coordinator, Victoria whispered several quiet instructions. The woman hesitated. Victoria smiled. It will only be a small misunderstanding. The evening unfolded smoothly. Emma spent most of it speaking with scholarship recipients, hospital directors, and non-profit volunteers, rather than wealthy donors. She asked questions, remembered names, listened far more than she spoke. Adrian observed from across the ballroom. Several executives approached him. "You should introduce Emma to Senator Collins." Before Adrian could answer, another executive laughed. "She already has." "What?" "They've been talking for 15 minutes. He turned. The senator was smiling. Actually smiling. Emma was listening to the elderly politician describe his late wife's literacy program. She wasn't networking. She wasn't promoting herself. She was making another human being feel heard. Adrian realized something remarkable. Every important person Emma met walked away believing she had done them a favor. Not because she flattered them, because she genuinely cared. Near the center of the ballroom, Victoria decided it was time. She approached the stage where the Master of Ceremonies prepared to begin the Donor Recognition Awards. Quietly, she handed him a revised seating list. 5 minutes later, the announcement echoed through the ballroom. Before recognizing our distinguished benefactors, we'd like to invite several honored guests to the front. One by one, names were called. Business leaders, philanthropists, government officials. Finally, Miss Emma Brooks. Emma looked surprised. She hadn't donated anything. Several guests exchanged confused looks. Victoria watched with perfect composure. Emma walked onto the stage. The presenter smiled awkwardly. "I'm terribly sorry." He shuffled through his notes. It appears there has been an administrative error. Soft laughter rippled across the ballroom. There isn't actually an award prepared for you. More laughter. Not loud, not cruel, just enough. Enough to make someone wish the floor would open beneath them. Emma felt hundreds of eyes settle upon her. She recognized exactly what had happened. Someone wanted this moment. Someone wanted her embarrassment to become entertainment. For one painful heartbeat, the 13-year-old girl who had once eaten lunch alone at school threatened to return. Then another thought replaced her. The volunteers, the scholarship students, the hospital nurses she had met earlier. They were watching too. How she responded would matter far more than why this happened. Emma smiled warmly at the presenter. It seems you've accidentally given me the easiest speech of the evening. The audience quieted. She accepted the empty microphone. My parents taught me something wonderful. She looked around the ballroom. They said, recognition is a gift. She paused. But purpose isn't. A few people straightened in their seats. I didn't come tonight expecting applause. She smiled gently. I came because somewhere in this room are people raising money for children they'll probably never meet. Her voice remained calm. If tonight teaches us anything, she handed the microphone back. I hope it's that sometimes the people doing the most important work are the ones whose names were never meant to be called. Silence. Not uncomfortable silence. Respectful silence. Then, one person applauded. Adrian. Another joined. Then another. Within seconds, the entire ballroom stood. The standing ovation lasted nearly a full minute. Victoria's elegant trap had transformed into the evening's most memorable moment. Later that night, Emma escaped onto the terrace overlooking the city. The cool air steadied her breathing. She heard footsteps behind her. I owe you an apology. She turned. The master of ceremonies stood, holding the envelope that had caused the confusion. There was never an administrative mistake. Emma nodded softly. I know. I should have questioned the instruction. You were doing your job. No. His voice cracked slightly. I was helping someone humiliate another person. Emma looked toward the skyline. You helped reveal something instead. What? The kind of room we're all standing in. The man lowered his eyes. I've never seen anyone respond like you did. Emma smiled. I have. He looked confused. My mother. When people tried to make her feel small, Emma's expression softened with memory. She always refused to become smaller. Adrian found her several minutes later. You disappeared. I needed fresh air. He stood beside her in silence. Below them, Manhattan shimmered like another galaxy. Finally, he spoke. Why didn't you expose Victoria? Emma rested her hands on the balcony railing. What would that accomplish? Justice. She shook her head. No, only victory. He looked at her. There is a difference. If I humiliate someone in return. She smiled sadly. Then the evening becomes about us. She glanced back toward the ballroom. I'd rather people remember the children the gala was supposed to help. Adrian had spent 20 years watching powerful people weaponize every perceived weakness. Status, money, influence, pride. Emma possessed none of those weapons. Yet somehow, she kept winning battles no one else even realized were being fought. Not by defeating people, by refusing to become like them. For perhaps the first time in his life, Adrian questioned whether strength had ever truly been measured by power, or whether it had always belonged to people brave enough to choose kindness when cruelty would have been easier. Neither of them noticed Victoria watching from inside the ballroom. Her smile had disappeared completely. She had underestimated Emma. That mistake would never happen again. If quiet humiliation couldn't destroy the consultant, Victoria would attack the only thing Emma truly valued, her reputation. And this time, The consequences would threaten far more than wounded pride. They would place the future of the entire DeLuca empire at risk. By Monday morning, Emma realized something had changed. Not inside the boardroom, outside it. Conversations stopped when she entered elevators. People who had once smiled politely now offered only brief nods. Assistants suddenly became careful with their words. Even the receptionist, who had always greeted her warmly, seemed strangely uncomfortable. Emma didn't ask why. Experience had taught her that rumors always reached the person they targeted last. The answer arrived before noon. One of the younger analysts quietly approached her desk. "I probably shouldn't tell you this." Emma looked up from her notes. "What happened?" The young man hesitated. "Someone's saying you manipulated Mr. DeLuca." Emma almost laughed. "Manipulated him? They're saying you're positioning yourself to become part of the family." Emma stared at him in disbelief. "I've known the man for less than a week. I know. But that's not the story people are repeating." He lowered his voice. "They're calling you ambitious." Emma smiled sadly. "That's interesting." "What is?" "Most of my life, people assumed I wasn't attractive enough for anyone to notice." She returned to her paperwork. "Apparently now, I'm dangerous enough to fear." Across Manhattan, Victoria Romano watched the rumors spread exactly as planned. She had learned years earlier that lies didn't need to be believable, only repeatable. She never accused Emma directly. Instead, she simply asked carefully chosen questions. "Isn't it unusual that Adrian suddenly trusts someone he barely knows? I wonder whether professional admiration sometimes becomes personal. I'm sure it's only coincidence." Every sentence ended with plausible innocence. Every conversation planted another seed. Within 48 hours, New York's financial circles had created an entire story that had never happened. Emma wasn't fighting facts. She was fighting imagination. That afternoon, Adrian noticed the difference immediately. Executives who normally welcomed Emma now questioned every recommendation she made. One investor interrupted her 3 times during a presentation. Another dismissed her analysis without reading it. The atmosphere had become unmistakably hostile. After the meeting, Adrian called his chief of staff into his office. "What changed?" The man hesitated. "I was hoping the rumors wouldn't reach you. They already have. They're saying Ms. Brooks is influencing your decisions for personal reasons." Adrian remained silent. "And your response?" "I ignored them." Adrian looked out the window. That was the wrong response. The chief of staff frowned. "You want us to deny them?" "No." "Then what?" "I want the truth to become louder than gossip." Emma was packing her laptop when Adrian appeared outside the conference room. "Walk with me." Neither of them spoke until they reached the building's rooftop garden. The city stretched endlessly beneath them. "I've heard the rumors," Emma said quietly. "I assumed you had. They'll hurt your business." "They already have." She looked away. "I'm sorry." He studied her expression. "Why are you apologizing?" "Because I became the distraction. You became the target. There isn't much difference." "There is." His voice remained calm. "You didn't choose this." Emma smiled weakly. "It feels strangely familiar." He waited. "When I was 14, she rested her hands on the railing. A group of girls started a rumor that I had asked the most popular boy in school to the dance. What happened? I hadn't. But everyone believed I had." She laughed softly. "They rejected me for something I never even did." Adrian said nothing. They laughed whenever I walked through the hallway. She shrugged. "Eventually I stopped correcting people." "Why?" "Because I discovered something." She looked toward the skyline. People who enjoy believing the worst about someone rarely change their minds because of evidence. That evening, Adrian made a decision. The following day's strategy meeting included more than 40 executives, investors, and legal advisors. Normally Emma sat near the back. Normally Adrian entered alone. This time, he walked into the room beside her. Conversations stopped instantly. He waited until everyone had taken their seats, then spoke. "Before we begin," his voice echoed through the conference room. "I've heard several conversations regarding Ms. Brooks." No one moved. "If anyone believes she has influenced a single business decision through anything other than professional competence," he placed a thick stack of reports on the table. "Please identify one recommendation of hers that has been incorrect." Silence. He waited. 1 minute. No answer came. Another 30 seconds. Still nothing. Finally, Adrian continued. "She has prevented 2 catastrophic financial mistakes in 6 days. He looked slowly around the room. "Some of you have worked with me for over 20 years. Another pause. "None of you have done that." The words weren't cruel. They were factual. And somehow that made them impossible to argue with. "If your criticism concerns her work," he folded his hands. "I'm listening. If your criticism concerns her appearance," his voice became even quieter. "You're no longer discussing business." Nobody spoke. Nobody even looked toward Emma. For the first time since joining DeLuca Holdings, someone had defended her before she needed to defend herself. After the meeting, Emma found Adrian standing alone in the archive room reviewing merger documents. "You shouldn't have done that." He looked up. "Why not?" "Now they'll talk even more." "They already were." She sighed. "I know how these things end." "How?" "The woman leaves." She smiled sadly. "The rumors stop." Adrian closed the file in front of him. "And if the rumors continue anyway?" Emma hesitated. "I suppose they'll find someone else." He nodded once. "Exactly." She looked at him in surprise. "You believe that? I've spent my entire life watching people attack whoever threatens their comfort." He walked toward another shelf. "They're not afraid of you. They seem to be." "No." He picked up another contract. "They're afraid that your honesty makes their excuses impossible." Emma had never considered that possibility. It frightened her almost as much as it comforted her. Late that night, while reviewing hundreds of pages related to the pending merger, Emma noticed something strange. The financial numbers matched. The legal language appeared sound. The risk analysis had been independently verified. Everything looked perfect. Too perfect. A familiar feeling settled into the pit of her stomach. She leaned closer. One appendix referenced another, which referenced a third document, which referenced nothing. Page 214 cited an amendment that no longer existed. Emma searched the digital archive. The amendment had been removed or replaced. Someone had rewritten part of the agreement after legal approval. She requested the original draft. Access denied. She requested the revision history. Restricted. For the first time since arriving at DeLuca Holdings, Emma wasn't looking at a mistake. She was looking at something that appeared deliberate. Outside the office windows, Manhattan glittered beneath the midnight sky. Inside, Emma slowly realized that the rumors surrounding her had never been the real threat. They had only been a distraction. Somewhere, inside the merger documents, hidden behind thousands of perfectly ordinary words. Someone had buried a secret capable of destroying a $4 billion agreement, and whoever had hidden it was counting on everyone being too busy watching Emma to notice the trap waiting beneath the empire itself. Emma didn't go home that night. Long after the cleaning staff had left and most of Manhattan had fallen asleep, the lights inside the executive conference room remained on. 3 versions of the merger agreement lay spread across the polished oak table. At first glance, they appeared identical. The same clauses, the same signatures, the same financial schedules. Only someone with Emma's patience would notice that one paragraph referenced an appendix that no longer existed. She compared every version line by line. Then something caught her eye. The deleted appendix had not vanished. It had simply been renumbered. Someone wanted future reviewers to believe it had never existed. Emma felt a chill. This wasn't sloppy legal work. It was deliberate camouflage. She requested archived server backups. Access denied. She requested document metadata. Restricted. Only 3 people had authorization to alter files after legal approval. One was Adrian. One was the chief legal officer. The third belonged to an outside legal representative hired by the investment consortium. Emma stared at the screen. If she was right, someone outside the DeLuca organization had quietly rewritten the agreement after negotiations were supposedly complete. Not to steal money. Something far more dangerous. To shift responsibility. At 7 the next morning, Adrian entered the boardroom carrying coffee. He stopped when he saw Emma still working. "You never went home." "I lost track of time." He looked at the mountain of documents. "You found something." "I think someone wanted us to find everything." She slid one contract toward him. "Except this." Adrian read silently. Then again. His expression never changed. "What am I looking at?" Emma circled 3 nearly invisible references. The agreement everyone approved isn't the agreement everyone thinks they approved. He frowned. "Explain." "The liability clause was moved." "So?" "So now it activates under completely different conditions." She turned another page. "If the merger proceeds exactly as planned," she inhaled slowly, "your family becomes financially responsible for every unresolved environmental lawsuit involving the acquired company's overseas subsidiaries." The room fell silent. Adrian looked back at the numbers. "How much?" Emma answered quietly. "Potentially more than the value of the merger itself." Within an hour, the executive board assembled. Outside counsel, financial analysts, senior partners. Every face grew more serious as Emma walked them through the evidence. No dramatic accusations, no emotional speeches. Only facts, page numbers, revision histories, cross-references. When she finished, nobody spoke. Finally, the chief legal officer whispered, "My God." He removed his glasses. "We reviewed this agreement for 6 months." Emma nodded gently. "I know. We never saw it. You weren't supposed to." Another attorney looked at Adrian. "If this closes tomorrow." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Everyone understood. The DeLuca empire wouldn't collapse overnight. It would slowly bleed itself dry through years of litigation. Exactly the kind of destruction sophisticated enough to appear like ordinary business failure. The emergency investigation uncovered the truth before sunset. A rival investment group had secretly coordinated with one outside legal consultant. The rewritten clause would have transferred billions in future liabilities without triggering immediate regulatory concern. By the time anyone discovered it, the damage would have been irreversible. One executive slammed his notebook shut. "They nearly destroyed us." Adrian remained remarkably calm. "No." His eyes drifted toward Emma. "They nearly destroyed us." He emphasized the final word. Because without Emma, no one would have found the trap. News of the discovery spread through financial circles within hours. The same executives who had questioned Emma's competence now waited outside her office asking for advice. The analysts who once ignored her notes suddenly requested copies of every report she produced. People who had whispered behind her back now greeted her with unmistakable respect. Emma noticed the difference immediately. She also noticed something else. Nothing inside her had changed. She was still the same woman who preferred reading contracts over attending parties. Still the same woman who packed homemade lunches. Still the same woman who quietly thanked receptionists by name. Respect, she realized, often arrived long after character had already been tested. Late that afternoon, Adrian's uncle entered his nephew's office. He closed the door. "I owe you an apology." Adrian looked up. "For what?" "I judged her." He sighed heavily. "I thought she would become a weakness." Adrian waited. Instead, the older man smiled faintly. "She may be the strongest person in this building." Adrian returned to the merger documents. "I know." His uncle hesitated. "There is something else." "What?" "The board wants to publicly recognize her." Adrian nodded. "They should. They're also discussing offering her an executive position." Silence lingered. His uncle studied his nephew carefully. "And you? What about me? What do you want?" For perhaps the first time in many years, Adrian didn't answer immediately. Because the truthful answer had nothing to do with business. Emma received the official offer that evening. Permanent Executive Strategy Director. A salary beyond anything she had imagined. Private office. Stock options. Influence. Prestige. Everything her younger self would once have believed represented success. She read the proposal twice, then quietly folded it. Instead of signing, she walked through the nearly empty headquarters. The janitor smiled as she passed. She stopped to help him lift a heavy storage box. He thanked her. Neither recognized the irony. One woman had just saved billions of dollars. The other man simply appreciated an extra pair of hands. Emma smiled all the way to the elevator. The next morning, Victoria Romano watched the financial headlines with growing disbelief. DeLuca merger, saved after last-minute legal discovery. No mention of Emma by name, but everyone inside the industry already knew. Victoria understood something terrifying. She had underestimated Emma from the beginning, not because Emma was smarter, because she was incorruptible. She couldn't be bribed. She couldn't be flattered. She couldn't even be tempted by prestige. That made her almost impossible to manipulate. Victoria whispered quietly to herself, "If I can't destroy her career," her reflection stared back from the dark television screen, "I'll make sure she walks away on her own." Emma never heard those words. She was too busy standing alone in Adrian's office after everyone else had left. "I've decided." He looked up. "About the promotion?" She nodded. "I'm declining." For the first time since meeting her, Adrian looked genuinely surprised. "You've earned it." "I know." "Then why?" Emma smiled softly. "Because I came here to solve one problem." She glanced toward the skyline. "Some people mistake gratitude for belonging." He remained silent. "I don't." Those words settled heavily between them. Adrian suddenly understood what logic refused to accept. Emma had never been staying because of the salary, or the prestige, or even because of him. She stayed because she believed she could help. And if she ever decided that her presence caused more harm than good, nothing in the world could convince her to remain. For the first time, the possibility of losing Emma felt more frightening than losing the merger itself. He simply hadn't admitted it yet. But very soon, she would make the decision for him. Emma spent most of the next day smiling. No one noticed how carefully she was saying goodbye. She thanked the receptionist for always remembering her favorite tea. She left handwritten notes for 2 junior analysts who had asked thoughtful questions during meetings. She organized every file on the shared drive, so whoever replaced her would never wonder where anything belonged. She even watered the small plant sitting on the windowsill outside the strategy department. It had nearly died during her first week. Now new green leaves reached toward the morning sun. She smiled. People rarely noticed quiet acts of care. That was all right. She had never performed them to be noticed. At noon, an envelope appeared on Adrian's desk. No courier, no assistant, just a plain white envelope with one word written neatly across the front. Adrian. Inside lay a single page, Thank you for believing in me before I believed in myself. You gave me something no promotion ever could. You looked at me without deciding who I was before I spoke. Please don't mistake this decision for rejection. Sometimes leaving is the kindest thing a person can do. Your family deserves peace. Your company deserves stability. You deserve the future you've spent your entire life building. Please don't come after me. If my absence makes your path easier, then everything I learned here will have been worth it. Emma. Adrian read the letter twice, then a third time. He noticed what no one else would. Emma never once mentioned herself. Not what she wanted, not what she hoped for, only what she believed everyone else deserved. He folded the letter carefully. For the first time in years, his perfectly controlled breathing became uneven. Meanwhile, Victoria stood outside the executive boardroom speaking quietly with Adrian's uncle. I never wanted things to become this unpleasant. The older man sighed. Neither did I. But perhaps this is for the best. He looked toward the empty strategy office. The board has stopped arguing. So has the press. The merger can finally proceed. Victoria nodded sympathetically. Sometimes difficult choices protect everyone. Neither of them noticed Adrian standing at the end of the hallway. He had heard every word. Neither speaker sounded cruel. That disturbed him most, because they genuinely believed peace had been restored. Only Adrian understood what had actually happened. They had mistaken silence for harmony. Emma packed the last of her belongings into the same inexpensive leather handbag she had carried on her first day. One notebook, a fountain pen, 2 family photographs. Nothing else. She looked around the office one final time. No private office. No expensive artwork. No executive privileges. Yet somehow, she had been happier inside those walls than anywhere she could remember. Not because of success, because for a brief moment, she had believed she belonged somewhere. She quietly laughed at herself. It was nice while it lasted. Then she walked away. By early evening, the DeLuca estate had transformed into the most important business gathering of the year. 300 guests filled the grand ballroom. International investors, political leaders, corporate partners, old money families. The $4 billion merger represented years of planning. Every camera waited. Every contract had been prepared. Every signature line was marked. The orchestra played softly in the background. Champagne flowed. Everyone smiled. Everything looked perfect. Exactly the way disasters often began. Adrian entered wearing a perfectly tailored black tuxedo. Applause followed him across the ballroom. He acknowledged no one. His uncle approached immediately. The press is ready. A nod. The investors. They're waiting. The contracts. Prepared. Everything was proceeding according to plan. Everything except one thing. Emma wasn't there. He looked toward the entrance without realizing it. Again and again. His chief advisor noticed. She's gone. I know. She resigned this morning. I know. You should let her. No answer came. Across the city, Emma loaded her suitcase into the trunk of an old taxi. She had rented a small apartment in Boston. A consulting firm there had offered temporary work. No headlines. No billion-dollar negotiations. Just ordinary problems. Ordinary people. An ordinary life. Exactly the life she believed she deserved. The driver closed the trunk. Airport? Emma nodded. JFK, please. The taxi pulled away from the curb. She never looked back, because looking back made leaving harder. Inside the ballroom, the ceremony began. The master of ceremonies welcomed the guests. Speeches followed. Then the merger documents were carried toward the signing table. Cameras flashed continuously. Adrian took his seat. Across from him sat the lead representative of the investment consortium. The attorney slid the final contract forward. "Mr. DeLuca," he smiled confidently. "Shall we make history?" Adrian rested one hand on the pen. Instead of signing, his eyes drifted toward the ballroom entrance once more. Empty. Something inside him finally became impossible to ignore. He wasn't thinking about the merger, or the cameras, or even the billions waiting behind his signature. He was remembering something Emma had once said. People who spend their lives proving their worth eventually forget they already had it. He realized she had never truly been talking about herself. She had been talking about everyone, including him. At that exact moment, Emma's taxi stopped at a red light, only a few blocks from the estate. She glanced absent-mindedly through the window. The Manhattan skyline glowed beneath the evening sky. For reasons she couldn't explain, tears filled her eyes. Not because she regretted leaving. Because she wished things could have been different. She whispered almost silently, "I hope you're happy." The traffic light turned green. The taxi continued forward. Back inside the ballroom, Adrian slowly stood. The attorney looked confused. "Is something wrong?" His uncle leaned closer. "Adrian." 300 conversations faded into silence. He looked across the room, at the contracts, at the investors, at the empire he had spent 2 decades building. Then he remembered another image. Emma helping a janitor carry heavy boxes. Emma thanking receptionists. Emma refusing wealth she had earned. Emma choosing dignity instead of revenge. Emma leaving so everyone else could have peace. Only then did Adrian understand. The empire hadn't changed Emma. Emma had changed the way he measured the empire. He pushed the contract gently away. The attorney blinked. "Mr. DeLuca?" Adrian spoke 4 words. "Cancel the merger." The sentence exploded through the ballroom. A billionaire shot to his feet. "Adrian, that's a $4 billion deal." His uncle stared in disbelief. "You're throwing away everything." No response. Adrian was already walking toward the exit. Toward the woman everyone else had convinced themselves was replaceable. Only he finally understood the truth. Empires could always be rebuilt. Character could not. And if he let Emma disappear because she believed she wasn't worth choosing, he would lose the only thing no amount of power could ever buy back. The ballroom watched in stunned silence as the most powerful man in the room walked away from unimaginable wealth to find the one woman who had never asked him to choose her at all. The grand ballroom remained frozen. No one followed Adrian. No one dared to stop him. 300 of New York's most influential people watched as the man they had always admired for his discipline walked away from the largest business decision of his career. Behind him, cameras continued flashing. Journalists whispered frantically. Investors demanded explanations. None of it mattered. For the first time in 20 years, Adrian DeLuca wasn't walking toward power. He was walking toward truth. Outside, the night air felt strangely quiet. His driver hurried forward. "Sir, where is she?" "The security team believes Ms. Brooks left for JFK about 20 minutes ago." Adrian looked toward the waiting limousine. No. He shook his head. Too slow. Without another word, he climbed into his own car. "Find the taxi." Only a few miles away, Emma leaned her head against the taxi window. The city lights blurred through tears she refused to wipe away. The driver glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "Business trip?" She smiled politely. "Something like that. You don't seem excited." "I thought leaving would be easier." He nodded, knowingly. "The hardest places to leave," he smiled gently, "are usually the ones where we finally felt seen." Emma looked out the window again. Maybe he was right. For most of her life, she had believed that being useful was the closest thing she would ever experience to being loved. At DeLuca Holdings, for a few impossible days, she had started believing those two things were different. That hope frightened her. Hope always hurt more than loneliness. The taxi slowed as traffic built near an intersection. Behind them, a black sedan stopped abruptly. Adrian stepped into the street before the car had completely halted. The taxi driver noticed first. "Miss!" He pointed toward the side mirror. "I think someone's running after us." Emma turned. Time seemed to stop. Adrian, without security, without assistance, without cameras. Simply Adrian. Running. She quickly opened the door. "What are you doing here?" He stopped only a few feet away, breathing harder than she had ever seen. "I've been looking for you." She stared at him. "You should be signing the merger." "I cancelled it." Emma's face lost all color. "No, I did." Her voice trembled. "Why?" For a long moment. Neither of them spoke. The traffic sounds faded into the distance. The city disappeared. There were no billion-dollar companies, no powerful families, only two people standing beneath the glow of New York streetlights. Finally, Adrian answered, "Because I almost made the worst decision of my life." Emma shook her head. "You've spent years building that company. I know. You can't throw it away because of me." He smiled sadly. "You're still trying to protect everyone except yourself." She lowered her eyes. "They're your family, and you're pretending you aren't important enough to become one." Tears gathered again. "You don't understand. Then help me." She looked at him helplessly. "I don't belong in your world." He took one slow step closer. "Emma." His voice remained calm. "The only person who keeps saying that," he gently placed a hand over his heart, "is you." She laughed softly through her tears. "You know what they called me growing up?" "I know. They weren't entirely wrong." "No," he answered without hesitation. "They were." Emma looked confused. "They believed no one would ever choose you." He smiled. "They were wrong." She looked away. "You don't owe me gratitude. This isn't gratitude. You admire me because I helped your company. If that were true," he shook his head, "I would have fallen in love with your first report." Silence. "I didn't." He looked directly into her eyes. "I fell in love with the woman who thanked receptionists, the woman who helped janitors, the woman who defended people who embarrassed her, the woman who walked away because she thought everyone else deserved peace." His voice softened. "You taught me something no business school ever could." "What?" "That success means very little if it costs you the person who reminds you why success mattered in the first place." Emma covered her face with both hands. For years, she had imagined what it might feel like to finally be chosen. She had always imagined dramatic words, perfect timing, fairy tale certainty. Instead, it felt quiet, safe, honest. "I don't know how to do this." She whispered the words through trembling fingers. "I've spent my whole life believing love had to be earned." Adrian gently lowered her hands. "No, you don't understand." "I do." He smiled. "I spent my whole life believing respect had to be purchased." They stood there smiling through tears at the strange ways two completely different lives had taught exactly the same lie. Several black vehicles slowly approached the intersection. Members of the DeLuca family, board members, guests from the gala. Word had spread quickly. One by one, people stepped onto the sidewalk. No one interrupted. Victoria Romano arrived last. She stood quietly beside Adrian's uncle. For the first time since Emma had entered their lives, Victoria truly looked at her, not at her dress, not at her weight, not at the social status she lacked, at the person herself. She finally understood why every attempt had failed. Emma had never been competing. Only Victoria had. After a long silence, Victoria walked forward. Emma instinctively straightened. Instead of another insult, Victoria extended her hand. "I owe you an apology." Emma looked surprised. "I judged you before I knew you." She smiled sadly. And in doing so, Victoria glanced toward Adrian. "I revealed far more about myself than I ever did about you." Emma accepted the handshake. "I appreciate that." Nothing more needed to be said. Some victories required humiliation. This one required humility. Adrian's uncle approached next. "When I first met you," he laughed quietly, "I thought you were the greatest threat to our family." Emma smiled. "I remember. I was wrong." He looked toward his nephew. "You didn't divide us." He paused. "You exposed what needed repairing." The older man extended his hand. "Welcome." Emma hesitated, then shook it. Around them, the people who had once whispered, "The fat girl no one wanted," now stepped forward one after another. Not because Adrian had ordered them to, because respect had finally replaced prejudice. Several weeks later, the DeLuca Foundation hosted another charity event. This time, there were no whispered jokes, no curious stares, no tests. Emma still wore simple dresses, still preferred listening to speaking, still arrived early to help volunteers arrange chairs before guests appeared. One scholarship student tugged gently on her sleeve. "Miss Brooks." "Yes?" "Mr. DeLuca says you're the smartest person in the room." Emma laughed. "He exaggerates." The little girl smiled. "I don't think he means your brain." Emma blinked. "What do you think he means?" The child pointed toward the volunteers Emma had been helping all morning. "I think he means your heart." Emma looked across the room. Adrian was already watching her. Not proudly, not possessively, simply, gratefully. He walked over and took her hand. No cameras, no speeches, no grand announcement. He didn't need the world to know whom he had chosen. She already knew, and for the first time in her life, that was enough. People often remembered the night Adrian DeLuca canceled a $4 billion merger. Financial magazines called it one of the boldest business decisions of the decade. Investors debated whether it had been reckless or brilliant. Analysts continued discussing it for years. But those who knew the full story remembered something entirely different. The merger wasn't the greatest thing Adrian ever gave up. His pride was. Emma Brooks didn't change the DeLuca empire because she discovered hidden clauses or prevented financial disasters. She changed it because she quietly proved that the strongest foundation any empire could ever possess wasn't built from wealth, but from character. And the woman who had spent most of her life believing she would never be chosen, eventually discovered that the right person never chooses you because you are the most impressive person in the room. They choose you because, when everyone else was chasing power, you never stopped choosing kindness.